All right. Hello and welcome to Staffbase Impact. That is our webinar series at Staffbase. And we are very excited today because our topic is, what are you waiting for? Find the courage to disrupt. I assume we have some brave participants here with us. We have one very brave presenter. His name is Jason Lauritsen, and I will introduce him in just a second. But first, I am going to tell you a little bit about Staffbase. So, Staffbase, we are the world's leading provider of mobile first employee communication for large organizations. Um, our employee apps provide internal communication. They also provide a front door to companies' intranets. Many companies have decided to integrate their intranet with us in order to share content that they already have, just to extend that reach. We also provide links to HR services. So we are able to, again, extend the reach for large organizations that have employees all over the world in multiple locations, or for smaller organizations that might have employees in different locations, in different states, in different cities. No matter what you look like, we are on standby to help you to communicate with your colleagues and to help you make the difference in your organization, to increase productivity, increase communication, and increase employee engagement. So we know that all of you on the line are the ones that are often leading that change or trying to fix things. And know that it takes a lot of courage to do so. So that's why Jason's here. He's going to help to pump us up, right, Jason?
Yeah, I'm going to do my best. If I can get my microphone turned on, I'm here to help.
Okay. Okay. Your microphone, and I can't see you yet. There you are.
Here I am.
All right,
Hey,
great.
everybody.
All right, so this is Jason Larson. Like I said, he is a wonderful speaker. He is also an author and a consultant. He is very passionate about the workplace and about what we can do in the workplace to make it better, and to make change, and to just to inspire people. He has a decade of HR experience under his belt, calls himself a corporate exec gone rogue. So I want to hear a little bit more about that later, Jason.
Hopefully you'll
um,
pick up on that as we go.
yeah, right. He's done a lot of research as well with more than 5,000 companies, about with quantum workplaces and their best places to work program, which is also something that's really interesting, I think, to this audience. And speaking to that would be interesting. He has a new book out this month. It's called Unlocking High Performance. You can get it on his website, jasonlauritsen.com. But we're excited to hear about that too. But I think the biggest topic, I think, Jason, and the reason why we wanted to hear from you and to get your insights for our community is that internal communicators that come to us at Staffbase are often looking for solutions to a number of problems, and trying to take that leap and to get leadership invested and just to really figure out how to spark a movement at work. And so we thought maybe coming to somebody like you who has been in so many workplaces and has done your research and your homework there could tell us, what we could do. How could we find the courage to make those changes and to make that difference?
Sure. Well, I'm going to do my best to give you lots of insights that you can take back today. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank
And
you
I
for
want
being here.
I'm going to start today with a story because the title of this presentation today actually started with a story or an experience going back almost 15 years. So, um, and Carl, I'm assuming that was my cue, right? It's all me.
Yes,
All right, good.
I'm going to ghost out for a few minutes, and I will come back in when we do questions at the end as you get going and tell your stories.
Awesome, awesome. Well, and everyone who's listening, we love questions. I love questions. Use the question function in your go-to webinar panel to put in questions, and we will get to as many of them as we can at the end of the webinar. And I will certainly take those on if we don't get to all of them. I'd be happy to answer them even after the fact. I'll answer them by email. So fire away as we go. So
Right.
back to my 15 years ago. I was it was my very first corporate HR job, and I was about a year into it. I was the recruiting manager, part of the HR management team, and I felt like I guess I'd been doing a really great job, and so we were coming up on my annual performance appraisal, right? The end of the first year, the annual ritual, and I felt pretty confident that I was going to get a good rating. They make a 5-point rating. I felt like, my performance was pretty close to a 5. We had been crushing our metrics. Our internal customers were happy. I felt like, sort of everything was firing on all cylinders for my team and I. And so I walked into this appraisal really confident. But my appraisal rating didn't end up being nearly as positive as I expected it to be. And as my boss explained to me, that she was the head of HR, as she explained to me as we talked through it, she did give me credit for having great performance relative to the recruiting metrics of my team and what we were doing there, but she dinged my performance rating because she had been getting some complaints from my peers, my fellow or the HR managers that I worked with. And one of them in particular, who this is not a picture of her, by the way, but it is sort of how I remember her. It's sort of my mental image, I guess, of her at that time. One of my colleagues, this woman, was particularly vocal in her complaints about me. And at the top of the list was that I wasn't spending enough time socializing with her, or stopping by her office to say hi and ask about her weekend or ask about her garden or her grandkids or whatever. And, frankly, that was fair feedback because I wasn't stopping by her office and I wasn't asking because, if I'm totally honest, I didn't like her very much and I really didn't care. And I thought it was irrelevant that to getting my work done and having an impact and performing. And so this was all fair. My boss saw it very differently. She saw it as extremely relevant. She thought this was impacting the team because my peers and I apparently weren't getting along the way she had hoped, and it was creating drama for her. She wanted it to stop, and so she had sent this message to me through my performance appraisal. I didn't take that very well. I was not happy. In fact, I was extraordinarily upset when I walked out of that room. I thought it was unfair. So I called my friend Kelly, who I worked with, and asked her if she had time to go to lunch. So we went off to lunch. We sat down. I started venting, spewing venom about how unfair this was and how ridiculous it was and all these things. And I went on and on for a while. And Kelly heard me out and she listened, as a great friend will do. And then as I finally got done, she looked at me and she kind of nodded her head and she said something that I will never forget. She's like, you can fix this anytime you want to, right? And I looked at her and she said, what are you waiting for? And it really hit me. Like it wasn't, that was not at all what I wanted to hear from her at the time. As you can imagine, I wanted her to say like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. And this is an injustice and we should crusade and fix this. But that's not what she said. She basically gave me this nudge that, hey, you can fix this. And I knew that was the case. I knew that it wasn't going to be pleasant to do so, but what I needed from her was that nudge. She gave me a nudge to essentially muster the courage to do what I knew needed to be done, which I wasn't looking forward to. But immediately after that lunch, I literally walked up the stairs back to the HR office. I walked over to this woman's office. I asked her if she had a little time to chat. We sat down. We had a really awkward, tense conversation for the next hour, but that hour changed everything. We never became best friends or anything. I'm not gonna this isn't that kind of story, but we learned how to work better together. And it was funny because I look back on it now and it's so ridiculous This went on for a long time. I knew that it needed to be better, and I knew that I wasn't probably doing what I should be doing to fix it or to make it better. But it wasn't until my friend Kelly sort of nudged me to have the guts to do what needed to be done that I finally actually did it. And once I took that step, everything changed and got better. And that's really what we're here to talk about today, is how do we find the guts in those moments to do the things that we are afraid of or that might not be the most fun things to do. And so, we titled this session about disruption, and that's because there's a lot of discussion. It's become really popular, I think, in our field to talk about disruption. Like, we need more disruption in HR or in how we approach internal communications or employee engagement, or all the things that sort of are the central to our work. And usually when we're talking about disruption, or people are talking to us about disruption, they're suggesting that, that's the disruption comes from having this like next great idea or new insight or some new technology tool or something. That's what's going to disrupt. And I honestly don't buy that. I don't think that's where the disruption is going to happen in our work, because the people I talk to, that are in, any of those roles, HR, internal comms, or engagement, or IT, or leadership, or wherever, I find there's no lack of ideas. In fact, in most cases, the people I'm talking to have a very clear idea of what's happening in their organization. They know what's wrong, and in most cases, they know what needs to be fixed. So the gap isn't a lack of ideas. There's plenty of ideas and know-how. The gap, or the problem, is existing somewhere between knowing what to do and actually being able to make it happen. And so what's the problem? Where's the disconnect? And I think to understand it, we have to step back and recognize that anytime we're talking about change or disruptive change, we have to know that when we push that forward, there's going to be resistance, right? There's going to be pushback. Regardless of how good of an idea we have, regardless of whether it's the right idea even, anytime we're pushing for change or pushing forward a solution, it could still fail, right? There's a lot of things outside of our control. So there's no guaranteed success. And because of all of these things, talking about change feels risky. And anytime something feels risky, there's a human emotion that pops up that is problematic for all of us, and that's fear. Right? As we consider what needs to be done, or the challenge or change that we think we need to make, once it starts to feel high stakes, or it starts to feel risky, there's this trigger that happens, and our brain starts to work against us. In fact, there's a little area in our brain that many of you have heard of called the amygdala. It's this little almond-sized area in our brain that plays a really big role. It controls things like our fear response, all of our emotional response, arousal, all of those things. Some people talk about it as the lizard brain because it's responsible for some of our more primitive functions like fight or flight, and that kind of thing. The thing is that the amygdala, this lizard brain, is really like our internal alarm system. When we feel like we are in danger, whether it's real or perceived danger, the lizard brain sends out a signal to our body that says, hey, we need to get to safety. We need to protect ourselves. And that often triggers a feeling of anxiety. And that anxiety that we feel does some really interesting things for us. If we're not in a physical danger situation, it's more of a perceived danger situation, which is what we often encounter at work when fear pops up. This anxiety triggers us to start asking what if questions, and these what if questions then sort of build up our self-doubt or sort of cripple our ability to move forward. And these are questions like this that you might recognize, right? What if I'm wrong? What if this makes me look bad? What if no one agrees with me when I bring this up? And then some of the really big ones, like what if I fail? What if this costs me my job? What if this ruins my career? We can come up with all of these what if questions. And this is the lizard brain, this little lizard brain whispering to us saying, hey, this is potentially dangerous. You should probably get back to safety. We should probably retreat, right? Let's play it safe. But here's the problem. Safe never changed anything. Right? If we want to be a disruptor, if we want to drive positive change and positive disruption and be that spark in our organization, we have to be able to move past the fear. We have to be able to move past, push past what the lizard brain wants us to do. And that requires courage. Because if you're going to do anything of consequence in your organization or in your life, it is going to be scary at times. There's going to be fear. But if you learn how to push through it, as we learn to have courage, we will begin to understand that courage is, or that fear is a sign that we are doing something important, something that matters. And so courage is really about feeling the fear and pushing on anyways, as John Wayne sort of wisely is telling us here. And so the thing is, fear and courage are interlinked, right? They're kind of like two sides of a coin, or certainly they're linked together. And in order for us to move forward when we feel anxious or fearful, we need courage. And the more fear, the more anxiety we feel, the more courage is required. But here's the bad news, I think, in this conversation is that, based on my experience and the research I've done, I'm not convinced that we can actually increase our capacity for courage. I think our capacity for courage is fairly natural, innate. Some of us are really have a lot of courage, and we'll go out and do adventure sports or sign up for the Marine Corps, or whatever. Others of us maybe not as much, don't have as much of that natural courage. And so trying to increase our capacity for courage so that we can overcome big fears is maybe not the most productive use of our time. But what I think everyone can do is learn how to, change their relationship with fear, to learn how to manage our fear, learn how to reduce our fear. Because if we can manage and reduce our fear, then it doesn't take as much courage to be seen as courageous, to take courageous action, because it doesn't feel as courageous to us. And so that's what we're going to really talk about in our conversation today, is how do we take this equation and learn how to be more courageous or take more courageous action by managing our fear. And the model that I want to share with you is actually born out of some experience that I've had recently through the lens or eyes of my son. So you're looking right now at a picture of my oldest son, Dylan. He recently just returned home from a tour with the United States Marine Corps. And for any of you, if you've known a Marine or if you had any exposure to the Marine Corps, you know that they are a pretty amazing training organization. They do some really astonishing things with young men in terms of the way they transform them. And frankly, when you think about a Marine and you think about what a Marine has to do, right, it's all about courage and knowing how to manage your fear, because you think about the kinds of ridiculous situations, the impossible situations that a Marine can face. You have to have courage and be able to face your fear in a way that doesn't cripple you, doesn't stop you, because your life depends on it and the life of others depends on it. And so there's a few things that I learned through observing how Dylan was transformed that I think are really informative to us, and so there's some lessons we can take back. But a little bit about his experience. If you know Marines, one of the things you know about Marines is that they are supremely confident. If you've ever made the mistake of referring to a Marine as a soldier, you have quickly been informed that Marines and soldiers are two different things. There's a Marine, and then there are soldiers. Everybody else are soldiers. Marines believe themselves to be part of the most elite fighting force on the planet, and that no one else matches what Marines are. And so that confidence is part of what they build starting in boot camp, is that they believe that they are that good. So they have that confidence, and that helps them face some pretty daunting situations. They also are incredibly well prepared. Dylan was in the infantry. He was a rifleman in the infantry, which when you're in the infantry, if you're not forward deployed, you're training. That's all they do is train, 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 train. And he'd been through some pretty intense, like multiple day simulations of former battles in the Middle East, like Fallujah, for example. They did a 3-day exercise where it was an entire battalion exercise. They actually have actors that play civilians and combatants and all these things. It's incredible the amount of training they go through. But they do that because they want those Marines to feel like they're prepared for anything. It doesn't matter. Nothing can surprise them. Nothing can catch them off guard. They're prepared for everything. And so preparation is key. That helps them feel more confident. Again, back to confidence. The preparation even builds that so they're ready for anything. And the final thing they do is they make sure they have the right tools. As a rifleman, Dylan's main tool, as you might guess, is the rifle. He had all those guys have pretty intimate relationship with their rifle. They know how to use it at a master level. They understand the ins and outs. That rifle is their key to being able to execute their mission and stay alive. And so they have these tools, and it's the exact right tool that the Marine Corps has found for them to have to do their job. And so, being a Marine is about learning how to manage fear so that you can be courageous in these situations. And so I think those same foundations, those same elements are things that we can take back to our own work, whether it's in our life or at work. And so confidence, preparation, and having the right tools are the keys. And I want to break down each of these and talk to you a little bit about some dimension of each in the time we have today. So let's start with confidence. And confidence has a lot to do with power. And I know because, if you've ever been, in a situation where you feel powerless or you don't feel like you have the power you need to be successful, you know how much that can cripple your ability to move forward, right? That it undermines your confidence when you feel powerless. But this is kind of a challenging topic because even probably when I mentioned the word power to you, or I mentioned the word power a second ago, you all probably had different reactions to that. If you were to run into somebody at work and you were having a conversation about career paths or development, and the person said to you one of their goals was to become as powerful as they can, some of you would maybe say, well, hey, good for you, and give them a high five. Some of you might look at them like they are some kind of criminal or amoral alien. Others you may just look at them like, I don't even know what that means or why you would pursue that. Like we have this really weird, complicated relationship with power. And I think it's because most of the time when we think of power, we think of images like this. We think of those who amass power for either selfish or evil reasons. So we've framed it up that way when there's just as many examples of people that have power that have used it for forces of good or for positive, unselfish reasons. And so a lot of how we feel about power has to do with our lens, how we choose to view it. But power itself is neither good nor bad. It's something that I think bears definition, and the definition that I love using and that I think is the best comes from Jeffrey Pfeffer, who has written a lot of great books. Hopefully you've heard that name. If you haven't, go research him. He's an amazing, he's an academic and a researcher and a writer and a guru. But he wrote one book actually called Power that breaks this down, and I recommend this book. But he defines power this way, that it's the potential ability to influence behavior, to change the course of events, to overcome resistance, and to get people to do things they otherwise would not do. When I first read this definition, it really struck me because as you read it, it sounds to me like kind of a job description for what we often do. Whether you're in internal comm or whether you're an HR generalist or practitioner or any place else, it sounds like, what business are we in? We're in the business of influencing behavior, changing things, right? Trying to make things better, overcoming resistance, and getting people to do things. So power isn't necessarily, power is that's something that we need. And if we had more of that, we could get more done. Hopefully we're all going to use it for forces of good, but power itself isn't good or bad. It's just something that can help us accomplish goals, to move things forward, to disrupt in positive ways, hopefully. So that's, I think, understanding that power isn't good or bad is the first step. The other thing about power that's important is understanding where it comes from. Because I think we have sometimes a very simple binary idea of what power is. But power can come from a lot of different sources in a lot of different ways. And I want to just break down a few of these to give you an idea that probably, number one, you're more powerful than you know you are, if you would use the powers you have. And there's probably power available to you that you're not thinking about that you could really cultivate. So let me share a couple of these with you. The first one is probably the most common one we think about in an organization: formal position, title. If I have a big title, I'm able to get people. I remember when I got my first VP title, when I started inviting people to meetings or asking for meetings, like people suddenly were taking those meetings and they were actually showing up to the meetings I was scheduled that they weren't last week. It wasn't because I'd gotten better at meetings or getting better at asking meetings. It was just because I had a different title, which seemed ridiculous to me, but that's, we get power from our title, from our hierarchy, and how we use that's really important. Some people use it positively, others abuse it. Another is energy and personal stamina. This may not be something you think about as power, but the example of this I think about are like distance runners or marathon runners, right? Their power comes from cultivating energy that they can channel into, stamina, long-term sustained effort. And this can work also in the workplace. I worked with a woman who was the head of HR, global, or not HR, employee relations, at a large organization, large global organization. And she was an attorney in Texas, and she was tough as nails. And she had a plaque sitting on her desk that said, "Outlast the bastards." And that's exactly kind of what her perspective on this was. And she was all about stamina. She's like, "Listen, you can come at me with nonsense. You can keep coming after me. I can stay in this as long as you can, and then longer." And so for her, that was a way that she thought about power. Communication skills, I don't have to probably belabor that with this group. If you can communicate better and more effectively than others, you're going to find more opportunities to influence and move the needle. Empathy is one that I think people underestimate. If you're empathetic, if you can understand where people are coming from truly, how they're feeling, what motivates them, and communicate to them in a way that resonates with that, you can get them to move on things that other people can't. So if you're highly empathetic, you have power that you're probably not wielding and using to its full extent. That is really, that's a really big power. It can be a superpower in organizations. Expertise, if you're the expert in the room, people look to you, right? If you know more about it, if you've cultivated expertise, people look to you for answers. There's power in that. You can influence people. People listen to you. Access to information is another source of power. For example, if you're I think IT is an example of this. IT often has access to lots of data in terms of pulling reports or pulling resources or being able to provide access to stuff, whether it's information or tools. How they can wield that, sometimes they can wield it in positive ways or negative ways, but it can be used in either way. Can they use that access to help you get what you need to move change and be a good partner? Same thing, I think, in HR roles. We have access to a lot of information that's highly sensitive, but that is highly powerful. How can we use that access in a positive way, in an ethical way, to help drive change? Tolerance of conflicts, another source of power. If you can hang in a conflict situation longer than others, the person oftentimes in a highly conflict-laden situation, the person still standing at the end that is least afraid of conflict has a lot of power in influencing where you land or where you end up. Relationships, we're going to talk more about relationships in a minute, but having a network of relationships throughout the organization who will support you, provide you information, encouragement, whatever, collaboration, can be incredibly powerful. I think we've all seen that and felt that. Focus. Right? If you can stay focused on what you want to get done and not get distracted, this is like we talk about, the squeaky wheel, right? This is the squeaky wheel kind of approach. Like if you stay at it, a lot of times it's kind of like stamina, related to stamina. You combine focus with stamina, you can actually oftentimes get things done. Where other people get distracted and move on and quit, you're still at it. And finally is professionalism. We oftentimes don't think about this, but an example of this is for me as a speaker. When I go out to do a keynote, for example, I could show up in a t-shirt and jeans if I wanted to. I can wear whatever I want as a speaker. That's in my That's my prerogative. But if I'm showing up to speak to a professional audience like all of you, and I show up in my t-shirt and jeans, you might sit and kind of say, huh, I'm not sure what I think about this guy. And then I have to kind of prove that I'm worthy of your attention or expertise. Whereas if I show up in a suit, which is what I wear to present, I look like I should, I look the way you expect me to. And so my professionalism invites you to have confidence in me, even though it might not be earned. Then I just have to prove that you're not wrong. And so professionalism can also be a source of power internally, like behaving and dressing in a way that earns the respect that you need. So I just went through a whole bunch. This isn't even a comprehensive list. This is a few different sources of power. Chances are you have some of these, and there's some of them that you could cultivate to be more powerful. The moral here with this first, with confidence, is if you want to build confidence to be more courageous, to manage your fear, it's about increasing your powers. And so this is your homework. And even hopefully as you've been listening, you're taking notes, like what are your superpowers today? It's first really understanding, where do you have power that maybe you didn't even think of as power before? You're empathetic, or you're a great communicator. You probably think of communication just as part of what you do, but that's also really incredibly powerful in driving change and making things happen. And then secondly, where can you develop more power? Because having more power at your disposal will help you feel more confident and get more things done. So that's confidence. That's sort of section one, or sort of option one in how we're going to tackle and make our fears feel smaller. The second is about preparation. As we talk about preparation, I want you to think about, the last time in a meeting, and I think all of us have had this experience where you sat in a meeting and you chose not to speak up or say something out loud that you felt was really important or you thought might be important. Right? You chose not to say it. And you probably, there's a lot of reasons for why we do that. You probably have a whole list of reasons. It can be like people get fired for speaking up or having the wrong opinion or pushing back on the boss, right? We have these perceived consequences that make it feel really risky to take that action, to take that step, to speak up. And so as a result, because we have this perceived consequence, it props up anxiety. That anxiety triggers our lizard brain, which says, yeah, let's just play it safe. Let's keep that to ourselves because maybe not the right thing to do. And so if we want to be courageous or more courageous in that instance, for example, if we wanted to be able to say that thing out loud, we have to attack those perceived consequences. We need to work on those reasons why we don't take that action, why we don't make that statement out loud. And to do that, I have found it really helpful to use 3 questions. And these 3 questions can be applied to any time you kind of feel that you're stuck or you're having trouble moving forward. And so it might be helpful right now to think about something in your work or in your organization where maybe you're stuck and you're having trouble moving, you're afraid, there's some of that anxiety about moving forward. Maybe it is speaking up in a particular meeting, or maybe you have a relationship challenge with a colleague like I did, and you need to do something about it. But think about that and think about the reasons that you have right now for why you don't do it. And the first question that you ask yourself is, what's the worst thing that can happen? If I take this action, if I do this thing, if I put forward this business case or have that conversation, what's the worst that can happen? And jot these things down, like be totally honest. If you believe speaking up in a meeting is going to potentially get you fired, then write that down, or it's going to ruin your career or whatever, limit your opportunities. So get those things down. Then you ask the second question, which is, considering that list of things, do you have any real evidence that any of those things has ever happened? I remember when I was in corporate, I used to hear people would say things to me like this all the time, like, well, I'm not going to do that because people get fired for that. And I would say, really? Who? Like, give me one example of someone that got fired for doing this, for speaking up in the meeting, or for whatever it was that they were considered. Like, who gets fired for that? Because it wasn't usually anything that you would normally get fired for. It was just that was the perceived reason. And usually when I said that, they're like, huh. Like, and then they'd pause and think, and they wouldn't have an example. And I'm like, are you sure anybody's ever gotten fired for that? Or are you just telling yourself that so that you don't have to do the hard thing? Oftentimes that's exactly what was happening. So once you've gone through your list, you're going to find some of them are probably real consequences that you've seen happen. Others are perceived. then the last question is, what's most likely to happen, right? What's the most likely worst case scenario? So if it's speaking up in a meeting, well, the most likely worst case scenario might be one of two things. Number one is you get ignored, or number two might be that somebody argues with you or challenges you or pushes back, right? Whatever that is. Well, now that you know what those things are, you can fall back on some tools that we learned back in elementary school for preparing and taking the power away from those. But if we're in elementary school or back in school and we wanted to do really well on a test, or we knew a test was going to be hard and we were scared of it, what would they tell you to do? Well, go study, right? Prepare more. Or if we wanted to be good at a sport or at an instrument or at some other talent, they would tell you to practice, like practice, 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 because the more you practice, the more you study, the more prepared you are, the less frightening that experience was, the more likely you were to perform better because you were ready for it. And so I think that's something we forget to do often. But once you know, if you know that people are going to push back, or you think you're going to be ignored, then ask yourself, well, what would I do? How do I deal with if I get ignored, or if people don't listen to me in that meeting when I speak up? How am I going to respond to that? What am I going to do? Get some strategies in place. And then practice with others, right? Practice it, whatever that is, because the more you are prepared, the less likely you are to be caught off guard. And then that doesn't feel scary anymore, right? It feels like you're being courageous, but really it's just not as scary because you're ready for it. So that's number two, is preparation. And then the last thing I want to share with you is tools. We talked about Dylan's tool being his rifle, and he had a whole bunch of different tools, but I want to talk with you about a tool that can help you in the workplace and in your life to be more courageous and to help sort of take the sting out of that fear. And that tool is a big, powerful posse. I know this is probably not a word that you hear used very often in business context, or maybe not in any context, to be honest. The first time I remember hearing the word posse goes clear back to when I was watching Western movies with my dad back in, like, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago. And they would always, in these Western movies, you would hear them talk about rounding up a posse. And usually that only happened when there was something really bad about to happen, or there was a gang of bad guys that they need to head off. The marshal would round up, a specialized, highly talented posse, and they would go out. And in most cases, the posse would win, right? They would have positive results. And movies are always true, right? So the point is, like, that posse and the idea of a posse, it does work in movies, but it also has proven that, and it proves out that same way in your personal life, your business life, that a posse can be one of the most powerful tools that you can have. In fact, the Latin root of the word posse means power. Right? This can be one of the most powerful tools you can put in your toolkit to drive change, to be a disruptor. And when we're talking about a posse, what we're talking about is sort of amassing a different kind of capital that you can invest in change, that you can invest in making things happen. It's called social capital. You're probably familiar with capital in the business sense, which is having money available to invest in opportunity. We talk about human capital oftentimes when we're talking about people, and the talents and skills that our employees have to create value, to make things happen. Social capital is a phrase used to describe the value, the things of value, the resources we have available available to us through our relationships with others. So that can show up in a lot of different ways. It can be information or resources or access to expertise. Simple example I always like to use is that when I was in corporate, I always wanted to have a friend in the IT help desk area, like have a friend so that when my stuff broke, I could just make a phone call. My friend would help me fix my stuff, as opposed to waiting in line or getting in a queue. I think a lot of people want to have a friend in HR, so when something happens, if their payroll's messed up or they have some question, they don't have to submit it to a helpline or help desk. They just make a phone call. So it's the same kind of thing, but because of the relationship, you have access to stuff of real value, and that can show up in a lot of different ways. When I got my last corporate HR job, I took over. I was the head of HR for a sizable regional bank, and one of the very first projects I had to tackle with my team was moving our insurance from a fully insured plan to a self-insured plan. Which, if you don't know anything about insurance, that's a really complicated thing to do in the benefits world. Like that is a big move. And in my past, prior to this, I had never done any real work in benefits. I'd always been on the strategic side of HR, in talent and that sort of thing. I never had done benefits. And so here I am with this huge complicated project with my team trying to figure this out, and I didn't know anything about benefits. And so thankfully though, I had a big posse, a big network built up. So I started making calls and activating my network and started having meetings and asking questions and getting educated. And thanks to my posse of, other HR leaders, of benefits consultants, of lawyers, of all sorts of people, I got educated really quickly. I got a lot of advice. We were able to successfully navigate through that, not just because of that, but because I could actually do a good job of leading my team through that because my posse supported me. So even when I was facing kind of a daunting challenge, I could lean on my posse to lift me up, to support me. And so that is the power of a network, right? So invest in one of the most powerful or most important things you can do is invest time and energy in building your network. And there's, I don't have time to break down like how that looks. If you want to know, my first book called Social Gravity is all about how to build a network, how to amass social capital. Dig into that because it's got the how-tos, but spend time. The biggest thing is you got to make time and spend time and be intentional about building relationships. Whew. So that's a lot. I could give you a lot more, but we are out of time. I want to stop and answer a few questions, but you can find your way to more courage, to be more disruptive, to have a bigger impact by changing your relationship with fear, right? By taking control of fear and not letting fear control you. And you can do that by building your confidence, investing in more preparation, and putting the right tools in your toolkit, like a big, powerful network of relationships, a big posse. And so all I would leave you with then is once you do that, and if you do that work, you know what needs to be done. What are you waiting for? It's time to go do it. So if you're ready for this journey, I also want to share a couple extra resources with you, and then we'll get to questions. I put together a recommended reading list because, like I said, I'm just scratching the surface, and really, this work isn't work that you solve in one webinar. It's work that you do over the course of a lifetime. And so here's some books if you want to dig in that you can go take a look at. I know we're going to be sending out the slides, so you will be able to get access to this, or you can grab a screenshot now if that's the case, or if that's what you need. But a bunch of books to go check out there. In addition to check out a copy of Social Gravity, or if you have questions for me about any of this after the fact, if we don't get to your question, here's how you can find me, just jason@jasonlauritsen.com, or you can hit my website and you can find me there. So with that, Carla, I'll turn it back to you, see what we've got. You're on mute.
Here I am.
There, now we can hear you.
There I am. No, thank you so much, Jason. That was great information. I want to ask you a question. Can you be in the Staffbase posse?
I think I'm officially in the Staffbase posse as of today.
Yay!
No
Yay! I
question
feel
about
powerful already.
it. Awesome.
Good. Let's see. If any of you do have questions for Jason, here's one. Jason, how do you think, or what's the best way to get leadership interested and invested in internal communication?
Wow, that's a big question. I think, well, my default position is always a show me, don't tell me kind of position. And so I think the key with leadership is understanding what it is they're trying to accomplish, what's most important. So what are our priority performance goals? What are our priority organizational objectives, strategically or otherwise? And then demonstrating how you can leverage great communication, whether it's communication strategies or tools or approaches or whatever it is, show them how it works, help them accomplish what's important to them using the magic that you have in communication, and then go back and make sure you remind them of how it happened so that they know where some of that came from. You have to go back, and because otherwise they'll take full credit for it. I mean, that's what executives do, right? And so you need to go back and remind them, track and measure and remind them. But that would be my advice, at least right off the cuff.
Right. And then another question, kind of once you muster that courage, once you get to that point, you've got the power, you've got the posse, you've got your network, and you're ready to go. How do you communicate? The question is, how can we communicate change and the need for change?
Hmm. Um, well, again, I'll come back. Like when I do a longer version of this particular session of this content, one of the tools that I talk about is sales skills. I'm an evangelist. I was lucky enough to start my career in sales. I sold copiers, which was like, it was incredibly hard. One of the hardest things I've ever done. Selling copiers, literally going like cold calling, face to face, kind of selling copy machines in rural Iowa, and not rural like door to door, but like small towns in rural Iowa, I should say. Wasn't trying to sell copiers to farmers. That would be incredibly hard. Um, but because I learned sales, what I learned was, I learned a lot of valuable things about how to get people to buy into things, right? It's all about influence. That's what sales is about. And one of the most important things to understand is about people is that people change. People have their own, there's two things that get people to change. There's pain, right? If I have some kind of pain that I want to stop, then I will invest in that. I will move. And the other is like there's something that motivates, some hot button or something I'm really motivated by. And so when you're trying to get people to buy into change, if you have the courage to tackle this, it's really studying who it is you're trying to get bought in. So is it an executive? Is it a group or whatever? And trying to understand like what are the pain what pain do they have that you can help solve, or that you can help them show like, hey, we have this pain and the way to make that stop is this change, or what's important to them, right? Put it in context of what their hot buttons are. So if you have a CEO that's all about brand and growing brand, then show them how, if we made this change, it's going to impact brand in this positive way, and here's the impact that's going to have, and when you're speaking their language that way, it can help too. So that would be the two things I would recommend focusing in on.
All right. And one more question here. What would you say is the very first step that you would take to make change?
Um, that's a great. I mean, so I think it depends on like if the question is, if I'm going to assume that you've already got the courage mustered up to do it. So if that's the question, or actually I'll answer it two ways. If you have the courage in place, you feel like I'm ready, I can do this, then I think the first question is getting really clear on why that change matters, like getting clear on the why, because oftentimes we skip forward. Be clear on the why, because when you're really clear on why it matters, then you get less attached to the specific way that you want to solve it. That's one of the challenges, or one of the ways that I saw a lot of my colleagues fall down or struggle in HR and and actually in a lot of other areas, is that they weren't really interested in the change. They were more married to the specific solution, that they fell in love with the solution. And I don't, when you get married to a solution, you sometimes can lose track of what you're trying to accomplish, and you'll end up going down in flames, not getting anything done. When like the example I always think about is this: is you go to the executives with a business case, and you've written this beautiful, you create this solution and you architect it with your team, and you spend all this time, you build a business case, and it's got, it's going to cost $300,000, and it's going to take da 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 da. And they talk, and you go into the executives, and you go through the conversation. And I remember this early on, because I fell into this mistake early in my career. And they'd say, well, I don't think we can, like go all that far, but what could we do with $100,000? And you're like, and I would get I would get pissed off because it's like, well, they obviously missed the brilliance of the solution. And I'm like, they just offered me $100,000 to go try and work on this problem. And so I'd lost track of the why. And so get clear on the why first. I think that's the most important. If you're thinking about how can I increase my capacity to drive change as a disruptor, invest in your network, build your posse. I think that's probably the most transformative thing you can do is if you get your network built in the right way, your network will save your tail over and over and over again and provide resources you don't expect.
Great. And then I have a question for you, Jason.
Okay.
I don't see any others here. What you said, defining your superpowers is important. What would you say that your superpowers are?
Um, I like to think I have several superpowers, but one of them is and I learned this, I realized this early on. What part of the reason I became a professional speaker was because I recognized along the way that one of my superpowers was I was a good talker, right? I was good at communicating like this. When I was in corporate, one of the reasons I could be effective was I could get in front of the leadership team or the management team and I could convince them of all sorts of things because I was really good at crafting messages and selling stories. And so I think what I'm doing today is one of my superpowers. That's why, and thankfully I was able to like turn it into something I can make money at. So that I think that's one that is probably towering for me. And I think another is just being able to connect with people.
Cool.
And so those are two of my superpowers.
I look forward to going back to our team at Staffbase and kind of trying to define what our superpowers are, and hopefully those grow over time too.
Yeah. When you can become like you want it like one of the things I always do with when I'm doing this as a workshop is I ask people to think about like we go into the world of fiction and think about like who is the most powerful superhero, and almost always people are like, well, it's Superman. It's like, well, why is it Superman? Well, Superman has like 10 different superpowers. Can fly, can like do, like has all these crazy superpowers. That's why Superman is like the Swiss Army knife of superpowers. And so I think that's you want to just keep adding superpowers. You can't. There's no limit to how many superpowers you can have. So I'm sure your team probably is already loaded with them, but they will certainly be able to develop more.
I think it takes a lot of different powers coming together to make a successful team. So I think so too. Um, Jason, I think let's see, the next slide.
Yep, let
For
me get to your, sorry,
Yeah, no
I'm
worries.
responsible. One of my superpowers is not clicking slides, obviously.
That's
There
all
you go.
right. Yeah. So we work with a lot of superheroes at Staffbase, communicators, HR professionals, IT professionals, all around the world. And if you want to hear some of their stories, we can kind of dig into a little bit more. We'll have more time to show you what tools they use and what works for them and how some of those things might work for you too. Visit us at staffbase.com/demo. Sign up and join us, and we can walk you through some of those stories. We can tell you about those superheroes. Their powers might be like yours, or you might be looking for something different. But anyway, let's have another chat. And we're really thankful that you were able to join us today with Jason. We will have 2 more webinars coming up in November, so keep an eye out for those communications. And again, we thank you so much, Jason, for being with us today and sharing all of your insights from the many years that you have spent in the workplace and from the many years and hours that you put in into talking to people like us on a daily basis.
Awesome. Thanks, Carla. Keep up the great work.
Thank you, and thank you to your son for serving as well. That was a great story.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone. Have a great day. Thank you.